So the Toronto Star is reporting that a mom called Children's Aid on her ex because he's been smoking around their 3-year-old. But it turns out there are no laws in Ontario that prohibit people from smoking in their homes in front of their children. So the question is exposing kids to secondhand smoke grounds for an intervention?
Well, Helena on Facebook thinks so. She said, I wish someone had intervened when I was a child 60 years ago. I was born and lived in a cloud of smoke for my first 20 years. If there's anything we can do to ensure a healthy environment for children, we should do it. A parent's selfish addiction should not even be considered.
That's a mic drop right there.
What do we think about that?
Yeah, right. Children's rights. I mean, there's parents' rights, but what about children's rights? Who's there to advocate?
Yeah,
right?
but
I agree.
And Helena, I'm glad you shared this, and I also grew up in a bit of a cloud of smoke before my mom banished my dad down to the basement. And I mean, for sure, I think I did end up being a smoker for about 10 years of my life. And I do think part of it was that I was fascinated by cigarettes. I remember like sort of picking them up and smelling them and thinking about them. They were around me. So that's like the next level. Although my sister didn't end up as a smoker, so who really knows? I will say as a mom now, it bothers me when Jaya is around people who smoke. His grandmother smokes on Jason's side, and his uncle smokes. He's close to both of them, and I don't want.
Do they smoke around him? No.
Well, I mean,
no.
he'll see it if he's outside, and he smells it for sure, and it does bother me. But if I try to be my best self, I think like, where do we draw the lines? There are many types of addictions that are damaging to kids, alcohol being one of them. There are many activities that parents do that are unhealthy for kids. So if we start picking on one thing, it's hard to know where you actually draw the lines. Many things are suspect.
I don't even want to call it picking, though. Like, I want to call it like raising awareness to something that needs to be dealt with. I remember when I was like teaching in elementary schools, I thought that someone was smoking in the hallway, and it was backpacks and jackets. Like, you would have thought this kid was smoking on their recess. That's how strong it was. No child should be exposed to that. No child should be coming to school smelling like that. So I wouldn't call it picking, but I definitely agree that something needs to be done because the kid didn't ask for that.
You know what it's making me think of in COVID times is that we know how much we've had this highlight on lungs and respiratory issues. And now you just think of kids who are, for whatever reason, and no fault of their own, in homes with smokers, and how much more susceptible that makes a child right now in these really scary times, whether they already have asthma, developed asthma as a result. There are over 4,000 chemicals in secondhand smoke, many of which cause cancer. So where is the retribution for that child when they're an adult, like the person that wrote to us, Sin, when you have all these problems afterwards? The flip side is, I don't want to just sit here and blame parents.
Yeah.
What help are they getting? Listen, it's not just enough to be like, you should not be smoking in front of your kids. This could be a really quitting smoking. I've never smoked, but you did, and you know that
My
addiction
dad
is hard.
did. My dad.
And quitting, but what was quitting
smoking
like, right?
It was
Like,
not.
it's not
it
easy.
was not easy, but it wasn't as hard as people. I think that. I mean, we could talk about this for hours, but I do think there is part of a mythology that makes people think, and it works for the tobacco industry. It makes people think it's a lot harder than it actually is. You can do it. You can do it. Like people have the mental fortitude. They can do it.
I think people can do it, but I do think it is an addiction. It's one of the strongest addictions. So while I certainly sympathize, of course, with the person who wrote in, and yes, it was terrible. Both my parents smoked. They smoked indoors. And do I harbor resentment like that viewer at my parents? Absolutely not. I mean, it was
If you had asthma,
a generation. I don't think I would either. Like, I think that in that time, people also didn't have the information we have now. So that's number one. Number two, while I definitely appreciate what that viewer said, and I 100% sympathize with that experience, I think the words combined together, selfish addiction, are very harmful. I don't think that we should be calling addictions selfish. I think we've done a lot of mental health work right now over the last few years to not characterize people who have addictions as something that they're just doing selfishly. It's neurological. It is a disease. Most of the people I know who have smoked don't want to smoke. When I smoked, I tried to quit many, many times through a variety of ways. And I know you said, Cynthia, it's not that hard. It is very hard for some people.
I'm not saying it's not that hard. I'm saying it's not as hard as the tobacco industry and those of
It
like
is very hard for a lot of people, though.
Sure,
and
I agree.
But at the same time, please, before people freak out on me, it is bad for kids. Secondhand
It's bad
smoke
for everybody.
It's bad for kids. It's bad for everybody. Kids shouldn't be exposed to it. That said, if you have an intervention in this way, let's say someone called the cops or the children's aid on my parents, what would happen to my parents? Just because my parents smoked, does that mean they're bad parents?
No. I think there's nuance here, and I don't know those nitty-gritty details with this couple, but in this case, I know the woman has a 3-year-old son, and that's a very young age for those little lungs.
For sure.
So is dad smoking around the child, or is the dad smoking outside? Is he smoking in the car?
With the kid in the car,
or is he choosing?
Lots of questions.
I'm sure
There's a lot of nuance
issue as well, right?
Sure,
Like if she makes that report, then she could add that to her case. There's all these additional layers to it. But I think culturally speaking, that's another chapter to this. So like with my husband's background, he grew up seeing his family in Europe smoking around kids all the time. It was normal. Drinking, smoking, it's a normal thing. So when I went back for the first time, I was like, why are we smoking near children? Why are we smoking at the dinner table? What is happening? And he's like, wait a second, this is wrong? It's like, yes, it's very wrong. So once he saw that, then he was able to talk to his family about that and say, this is something we need to cut out. Like, we shouldn't, but he grew up around it. It was so normal to him that when someone else sees from the outside and goes, hold up, this is really harmful for a child, hopefully that brings some awareness as well.
Yeah.